Hello and welcome. Coming up, taking a short break from the construction site, we had the Deputy Prime Minister, Rayner, boldly going left, where Starmer's Labour fears to tread Lib Dem leader Sir Ed Davey. And Anushka and Deep Screening with the answers to everything you didn't know you wanted to know.
I'll be asking if either party knows what to do about reform.
And throughout the show, two refugees from a simpler world where American presidents weren't so keen to occupy and take over Greenland or Gaza. Ex-Tory Education Secretary Gillian, Keegan and the former Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn. Watcher, the most annoying phrase in British politics is the Overton window. It's a pretentious way of saying that statements or policies that mainstream politicians thought were extreme or unacceptable just a few years earlier have suddenly become mainstream, usually because of some domestic or global shock or shift. Take our guest tonight, Jeremy Corbyn. Until a left-wing Labour Party led by him did unexpectedly well in the 2017 general election, the Tories were the party of privatisation and a shrinking state. Suddenly, after Labour surged in the polls, the succeeding Tory governments increased public spending and even took railway lines, some of them at least, back into public ownership. Trump, of course, is dragging the Overton window in the opposite direction, significantly rightward. For example, Keir Starmer now puts a crackdown on immigration at the top of his agenda and sides with Trump's Washington against the rest of the world in refusing to sign a new declaration drafted by France's Macron that calls for artificial intelligence to be open, inclusive, transparent, ethical, safe, secure and trustworthy. Ethics and inclusivity, in a Trumpian world, they're so last week. And as Kemi Badenoch completes her first 100 days as Tory leader, she's also paying homage to Trump and his ritual condemnation of judges who don't agree with him by attacking our judges for allegedly defying the will of Parliament by admitting Palestinian refugees to the UK. Where will the Overton window open next, I hear you asking? As ever, Elon Musk shows the way by bringing his mini-me son X into the Oval Office. In other words, what you'll soon see through the window is government by four-year-olds. Can't be worse than the so-called grown-ups. Anushka.
Thank you. Let's start with some exclusive polling from Ipsos. These are the latest approval numbers for Keir Starmer's government, and it is quite bleak. 48% of people think they're doing a fairly or very bad job. Not quite the lows of the Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss government, but a lot worse than when they won that landslide in July. And we have some great new research on that landslide from Marta Mayuri and Professor Jane Green. This underlines just how disproportionate Labour's win was. It looks at the number of seats each party has won over years and divides it by the vote share. So for Labour, this huge spike up here is because they won 411 seats with just 34% of the vote. The Lib Dems had been in a pretty bad position on this, not translating vote share into many seats, but after the 2019 disaster, they changed their attitude. And this is what happened. I can show you there, taking out big beasts like Gillian, Keegan. But look at reform down here. 5 seats felt big, but with 4.1 million votes, this ratio is very low. Could that change? Nigel Farage, we know, has his eyes on Lib Dem strategy. One reason that the left did so well is shown on this chart. It looks at progressive parties and the likelihood that voters went for their first choice, given the context of the overall race. So, for example, in Conservative Labour races, Labour supporters were very, very likely to vote for Labour, but fewer than 50% of Lib Dems backed their own party. Many voted tactically for Labour. The opposite in Conservative Lib Dem seats. Many Labour voters here appear to have voted for the Lib Dems. There was no formal pact, but massive tactical voting really did hammer the Tories. And another problem for the Tories was that reform vote. This shows the English seats that Labour took from Conservatives. And as you can see, a lot of these were won on pretty low percentages. The reason why? Up here. The right vote was split between the Tories in blue and Reform in, I would say green. I'm told it's teal. Now, we know support for reform has increased since the election, which is why Labour MPs are very worried about losing some of these seats. Already, a poll from JL Partners has Reform winning 102 seats and Labour only scraping it on 200. There is no pact on the right, but just imagine if their voters started to vote tactically. For this, Marta and Jane are our joint Geeks of the Week.
Jane Green getting a Geek of the Week. That's a bit of insider trading, given that she works for us. But anyway, that was absolutely fascinating. Now, obviously, later in the show, we will be looking at length, at the extraordinary conversation, 90-minute conversation between Trump and Putin, which many see as a precursor to America effectively handing over swathes of Ukraine to the Russian dictator. But I've got to start with some of what Anushka has just shown us. And, Jeremy, if I could just start with you. I mean, we've seen the extent to which reform poses a threat to both Labour and the Tories. If you look at the strategy of the party led by Keir Starmer, the party that you were a member of for most of your life till you got thrown out, do you think they're approaching it in the right way? Some would argue that Starmer is sort of allowing, particularly on immigration, Farage to actually set the agenda and therefore, by implication, he's almost endorsing reform.
I think the Labour strategy is fundamentally wrong. They're buying into the agenda set by Farage and reform, using similar language on immigration. I mean, this week putting out a poster being proudly saying how many people they've deported and not doing anything fundamental about issues like two-child benefit cap, winter fuel allowance, disability benefits. And so there isn't a message to Labour supporters who, by and large, want to see better welfare systems, by and large, want to see better public services. There isn't that message there. And so what Farage does is very clever. He says he's in favour, for example, of public ownership of water. He says he's in favour of workers' rights, but actually votes against them. But that's for him to work that out. But then at the same time, tries to use the image of desperate people seeking asylum as some or other the cause of all of our social problems. It's a very dangerous cocktail that Farage has put together, and it should be opposed.
I mean, Gillian, we just reached the 100-day milestone for Kemi Badenoch. Tory poll ratings plummeting. Everybody I've spoken to today have said that they thought she was embarrassingly poor at Prime Minister's questions today. It's not going very well for her, is it?
Well, first of all, to Jeremy's point of what you were asking, you can't out-Farage, so you don't want to be a
And I think the Tories are trying to do that as well, though, aren't they?
So you have
that's
to be yourself. You have to be yourself, and you have to be, you know, you have to understand your values. Obviously, it's a very difficult job to be Leader of the Opposition. It's a very difficult job to be Leader of the Opposition after you've been in government for 14 years. I mean, literally, the person who's done worse in every poll is where Labour started and where they are now. And, of course, only 1 in 5 people actually voted for them, if you take turnout into account. And they're not even popular now with the 1 in 5.
I did ask you about your party, though, not Labour. I mean, Jeremy has done a pretty good job of attacking his former party, so talk about your party.
But context is important, right? And I'm not just some talking head. I come here to be able to give context as well. So, you know, when you've been in power for 14 years and you are the leader of the new opposition, then it takes time. She'll get stronger, he'll get weaker, and Farage will get found out. That is actually what will happen, because it's really easy if you are reform. You've got no parts of government record.
Hang on a second. You say he'll be found out, but she, quite like Starmer in a way, is simply endorsing almost everything that he says by doing essentially reform-like stuff, like the attack at Prime Minister's questions today.
No, she's not. She has recognised, as we all have, and actually it's not just in our country, it's all over the world, immigration is a problem for the voters. It is a problem for the voters. And you talked about your Overton window, which we now all know what that is, but, you know, it is effectively... Is this now become a problem? It's become a problem because it's become a bigger problem. The size of it, the scale of it, the fact that it's very difficult to deal with, the fact that, you can't see any short-term end to it wherever you look. So it is an issue. It is an issue. You've seen how it's changing politics in Europe. So you can't ignore these things. And, he's not the first person that talked about immigration being a problem. We've talked about this for a while. And it's because people see the unfairness of it, whether it's people who've come illegally or whether it's people who can't get on the housing ladder or pay, whether it's people getting pushed
Actually,
down.
I've got a lot of time, so I'm just going to have to go very briefly back to Jeremy, because you have some important, rare experience in this issue. You were the leader of the opposition not that long ago.
Yeah.
That was you once, as they say. How difficult is it in your first, let's say, 100 days or so?
It's extremely difficult because you've got to appoint your team, you've got to get your team together, you've got to get all the organisation together, you've got to look at the policy changes you want to bring forward, and you have an utterly relentless diary pressure on you.
Did you have a degree of sympathy with Kemi Badenoch over her initiative?
I also think, if I may say so, that programmes such as this and others give a huge degree of importance to Prime Minister's question time. Yes, it's important, and it is the one bit of Parliament that the entirety of the
Was it
public
horrible doing
noticed.
that, particularly at the beginning?
Not always, no. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But it's like speaking to a baying mob in a down market pub most of the time.
Listen, I've got so much more I've got to ask you, and we'll try and sort of lift the conversation above the down market pub. But Anushka.
Thank you. We obviously know Angela Rayner as Deputy Prime Minister, but she has a pretty massive brief as well. And I want to focus on one area, which is housing, where Labour say they want to build 1.5 million new homes, a huge ambition. Now, this chart from the Resolution Foundation shows what percentage people spend on different products. Yellow is higher income households, blue is low to middle. And I just want to point out housing here at the top. People in poorer households spend more than 22% of their budget on housing, way above everything else. For richer households, it is only 13%. And the UK stands out massively on this next chart. It looks at the relationship between the price of housing and the prices of other goods. Look where we are, the worst housing costs across the OECD. The line at the bottom is the average for the OECD. These are all the countries above that average. We are almost 40% above it.
Thanks. Absolutely gripping and absolutely to the heart of my conversation that I had a little bit earlier with the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner. Now, I'm afraid I revealed to her that I'd never met anybody who believes she'll succeed in building the 1.5 million houses she's promising within 4.5 years. So what is her plan to prove the doubters wrong?
Well, Robert, I've had other people suggest that I'm not ambitious enough on my target. But look, the 1.5 million homes is a stretch target, considering where the Tories left us when we took over office in July. House building was going backwards. To reverse that trend, we need to pull a number of levers. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. So the National Planning Policy Framework changes, the Planning and Infrastructure Bill we're bringing forward in March, the New Homes Accelerator, the 500 million that we already announced, the Chancellor announced into the Affordable Homes Programme, the extra 350 million we announced today through the Affordable Homes Programme and the Local Authority Housing Fund, and
But Deputy Prime Minister, these are thousands of additional homes, not hundreds of thousands.
Well, the changes to National Planning Policy Framework, which sounds a bit archaic, but actually the mandatory targets that we've set, the devolution agenda where we're looking at spatial frameworking with mayors as well, all these little bits will add up to a significant number, and we'll see this trend as it ramps up as we get house building going forward.
Historically, the big lever was social housing. The last time this country built 1.5 million, in the late 70s, the lion's share were social housing. What proportion of your 1.5 million will be social housing?
Well, you've touched on something that's close to my heart as well. I believe we do need more council housing and social housing in this country. That's why we're putting record amounts of money into the Affordable Homes programme. But you'll have also seen I've made changes to Right to Buy as well, giving councils their full receipts so that they can build houses. And we've also given them stability on rents as well, so that they have a pipeline of money coming in so that they can build more social and affordable homes. And I want to see the biggest wave of social and affordable homes in the generation. Now that
So what does that mean? What does that mean in terms of numbers? Because people at home will really want to know.
Sure. And I'll try and explain why it's difficult to put a figure on that. Is because, for example, when developments come forward, they have a thing called a Section 106, which is where they have to give a certain amount of infrastructure and affordable and social housing as part of that development. Now, that can vary because in some areas of the country, materials are still the same price, but house prices are higher in some areas than others. So the affordability on site will reflect the amount of social housing you can get as part of that development.
But do you think you could end up with, I don't know, 500,000 new social houses this Parliament?
I think that's ambitious, if I'm honest, Robert, but I do think we need to stretch to put as many social housing as we possibly can. And I say that because far too many children are moved around at the moment. It's why we're making the changes through the Renters' Rights Bill to end Section 21 no-fault evictions as well. So there's a lot of moving parts that we're trying to pull the levers to bring the jigsaw together, to bring about decent homes, but also to have the right mixture and tenure of homes and the right amount in the supply chain that we need going forward.
Do you know what? I'm never going to do a jigsaw with you if you're pulling levers to put it together. But nonetheless, I'm now going to move on to another really important area, which is your workers' rights package. All of you, the Prime Minister, say getting growth up, getting productivity up is absolutely the priority. Now, a number of business leaders say that working from home is damaging our productivity at a time when we've got to get output per worker up. So why are you giving more powers to employees to insist they can work from home if it's going to make the country poorer?
Well, first of all, that's not true. What we are doing is a suite of packages and reforms in the Employment Rights Bill, which a vast majority of employers already do that, which we've already given over 1 million workers a pay rise with the national minimum wage changes that we brought in. And they obviously have more money that they spend in their local economy, so it helps business as well. But the flexibility side of it, look, we saw in the pandemic that people were incredibly...
What bit of what you said it was not true. What bit of what I said was not true, though? Because you haven't actually... What did I say that wasn't true, Angela?
I'm coming to it.
Right.
So we saw in the pandemic people were able to work incredibly flexibly. What we're saying is not one size fits all, but when I used to work as a home care worker, for example, when management told us we all had to work 7 days a week, 7 a.m. till 11 p.m, many of the workforce left because they couldn't get regular hours. Whereas when we as care workers were given our rota to be able to fit in and make sure that we deliver in the service around those hours, actually we saw productivity increase, sickness levels went down, and that the workers were able to maintain themselves within the workplace. So we're saying common sense is that actually working with the employer and with the employee, we can find flexible working within different sectors. Thinking outside the box sometimes means that there's gains for the employer as well as for the employee.
Now, we've got to move on to the dizzying exhausting, I would say, number of changes being announced by the American President, Donald Trump. You'll be aware that he is opposed to what's called diversity, equity and inclusion, essentially making workforces more diverse, more like society. Today, actually, Goldman Sachs told the BBC that they were stopping their ban on working for companies that have all-white boards. Plainly looks like a reaction to Trump. What would you say to Goldman Sachs?
Well, first of all, I'd say that, having a diverse workforce gains productivity again, and that all people should have the skills required to do their jobs, which is another reason why our Employment Rights Bill is around, not just about protections and rights at work, but it's also about how you can deliver the skills and development of the workforce going forward. So I actually think the most important thing when looking at employees and looking at your workforce is that having a diverse diverse workforce actually increases productivity and helps your business.
So you've got an opportunity now. Would you like to tell President Trump he's just wrong about this?
Well, it's not for me to tell President Trump his policies in the US. And I think the US was very clear on what they were saying around having people that are qualified for the job. And I think that's absolutely correct. In any employment, you have to be able to do the job you're being employed to do.
He is cancelling programmes that increase the diversity. And you say, and many people would agree with you, that actually productivity increases when you have a diverse workforce. He doesn't believe that.
Well, I believe that we can prove that point. You know, we can see some of our fantastic, you know, FTSE 100 companies that have diversity and also have incredible profits and you know, great growth within their business sector. So I don't think it's one or the other, and I think you have to prove that point. But what I heard from President Trump was that, you know, having qualified a person in their job is the most important thing, competency, and I think that's absolutely right. But I don't think it's a binary issue where you choose one or the other. I actually think you can do both of those things.
So, we're spoiling you tonight. There's more from Angela Rayner in just a minute. But, Gillian, I just want to ask you about this working from home issue. A number of employers have said to me that they worry that their output per employee, their productivity of their employees falls when more of their workforce are at home. Angela Rayner denies that. What do you think?
I'm not sure Angela's worked in that many businesses. I've worked in them for 30 years. When you get a team dynamic, that's when you get a lot of innovation. You also get lots of casual conversations, communications improved. So for sure, it depends what you're trying to do, and it depends the job. So it's way too broad a conversation to have about, you know, at a country level about a whole economy. But it depends on the job.
But she is giving more rights to employees to insist on working from home.
Yeah, well, she has no clue, right? She really has no clue about this. And pretty much everything she said is based on her ideology and not on evidence. Because the counterfactuals are the things that you don't know about. Businesses should be allowed to run their businesses. You do not need Angela Rayner or Rachel Reeves telling them what to do. So far, every intervention that they have made into the business world has been a disaster in the last 6 months. They should just keep off it, leave it to the experts, and the Education Secretary should leave it to the teachers, leave it to the experts. They're the people who know what to do. I have no idea what problem they're trying to solve. Now, I do have sympathy with people who work from home, they like working from home, they've lost the commuter costs. We were just talking about that. That's a big factor. People have got used to it, and you have a bit more of a work-life balance, but it's not always good for young people. Young people, you learn so much from other people in an organisation. So, first of all, it's too broad a conversation, but businesses themselves know what to do best. And there's no problem that she can solve that they can't.
Looking at it from a sort of, in a sense, another point of view, at the moment, despite lots of pressure, not just from Gillian, but from the whole business community, a lot of criticism of the business community about the workers' rights package, actually Angela and the government are holding firm and not backing down. Are you worried now that this government appears to be wanting to placate Trump that they will water down that package?
I'm not sure. I hope they don't water it down, but I do think that we get into a sort of strange binary conversation about working from home. Some jobs you can't work from home. If you're a plumber or electrician or a bricklayer, it's obviously not possible to work from home. I also think that in some cases employers encourage it because it reduces their costs of office space, desk space, etc., etc., and it throws the heating costs and everything onto the worker rather than the employer. But the other problem with working from home is it takes away the social infrastructure of work. And for many people, particularly single people who live alone, working from home is not necessarily a good thing. They need that team idea. So I think there should be a balance on it and not unlimited working from home.
We all thrive with the social contact, which is why it's such a joy to have you here tonight. Now, listen, in the second part of my conversation with the Deputy Prime Minister, I asked what her reaction was to President Trump's statement, extraordinary statement, my jaw dropped when I read it, about the Ukraine-Russia war earlier today.
Well, I haven't seen the note, Robert, but what I would refer back to is what the Prime Minister said earlier today in the House at Prime Minister's questions, and that's this country's steadfast support under, the previous government and now this government, and I would say the whole of Parliament for Ukraine and the illegal war and invasion that happened there. And we'll continue to support Ukraine, and that's what the Prime Minister was very clear when he answered that question earlier today in the House.
But if President Trump agrees a deal with Putin, there's nothing we can do, is there? It's over.
Well, again, we're very supportive of the Ukraine. We've seen what Putin's aggression has done, and across with our allies, we'll continue to support Ukraine's efforts. And the Prime Minister was very clear on that earlier today in the House. And I think he doesn't just speak for this government, but he speaks for the whole House when he says that, right from the start, Putin's aggression against Ukraine was condemned by all politicians, and the House has been united and will continue to be united.
There are some on your side of the House who are worried that in many of your newer policies, on immigration, for example, you are being, in a sense, led by reform, and that you're effectively endorsing reform, which only makes reform stronger. Do you share their concerns?
Well, I categorically don't agree with that assessment. We've been saying for a very long time, from my area where we were deindustrialised, for example, in northern towns, many of the jobs in the skilled workforce and the industry has gone. And that's what we've been saying is actually our young people need those opportunities to get the skills and to get the jobs. And we saw from the previous government that immigration went up because they decided rather than skill our workforce here, that they pull the visa lever and bring people and those skills to this country. This government have been right clear from the start that our young people deserve those opportunities, and that's not a change for any political gain. That's about having homegrown talent and growing our economy across all sectors and across the whole of the United Kingdom. And we haven't seen that for the last couple of decades. And unfortunately, northern towns in particular, and places outside of London, have suffered as a result of that. So our skills agenda, our industrial strategy, our growth strategy is about making sure that young people here can get those jobs into the future across the whole of England.
Now, annoyingly, we're almost out of time. I've just got to ask you one more thing. You've been in Parliament with your former minister colleague Andrew Gwynn for some time. What was your reaction when you learned that he made those sexist comments about you?
I was incredibly disappointed to see the contents of that WhatsApp group. I think it was disgusting, some of what was said in that group, and I'm genuinely shocked by it. It's not what I recognise from the councillors that I interact with, because obviously I'm neighbouring MP and Tameside is my borough as well. And for me, we've got our standards in public life. People put a lot of trust in us. And I felt that those standards were completely disregarded, and I was disgusted by what I saw in the group, not least just about comments around me or other members of Parliament, but actually the disdain and the comments that were made about their constituents, which I found absolutely abhorrent.
You are visibly upset. I'm sorry that you've been put through it, but listen, as always, very good to see you. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Don't go away, because after the break we will discuss what the government should do if Trump hands over big chunks of Ukraine to Putin. And we've got the leader of the Lib Dems, Davey. As I said, we're spoiling you. See you in a minute.
Thank you. Welcome to the break. #Peston. You may know that it is 50 years since Margaret Thatcher became leader of the opposition. And so, in her honour for you, perhaps, Gillian, in something else for you, perhaps, Jeremy, we're going to order Conservative leaders from our favourites at 1 to our least favourite at 5. We're going to have to do this separately because I think you might not agree. OK? So, Gillian...
You haven't got them all there, though.
Well, all the ones we're going to choose... You can add in some others in your
made
thoughts.
it a harder choice.
OK, come on then,
Where's
Gillian.
Winston
Who's
Churchill?
number 1 for you?
Where's Michael
Rishi?
Howard? Where's Theresa May,
Oh, these are
Where are Rishi and Theresa?
Come on, gotta go.
Where's Winston Churchill?
Okay,
Okay,
Jane.
one for me. Out of that bunch, I would say Margaret Thatcher, because she made the biggest difference.
Okay, then number 2.
I would say...
You've got David Cameron, you've got Kemi Badenoch, you've got Boris Johnson, you've got Liz Truss. Liz next?
Definitely not. I would say... let's go with potential and put Kemi there. I mean, it's a hard job to take over the party where we are.
Keep going fast for me,
David
Jeremy,
Cameron,
get
number
yours
3.
idea.
Boris Johnson, number 4.
You think
Liz
Kemi's
Truss,
doing a better
number
job
5.
than David Cameron did?
No, but I think he's in the past, she's the future, so we've got it all to see, and she's got a more difficult job. He had a difficult job, but when he took over the party, it wasn't as few MPs as we've got now.
Okay.
I mean, you know, so
Give her a chance.
I'm going to give her some encouragement.
Jeremy?
Can we do it in reverse order? Can we put Margaret Thatcher at number 5?
Oh, there we go.
Yep. And then can we put Boris Johnson at number 4?
Okay,
Yeah,
we've
he's there.
agreed.
You agree?
We agreed on that. And can we then put
Where you
Kemi
putting
Badenoch
Chris?
at number 3?
So Liz Truss is getting silver or gold
I
here.
tell you what, you're a Liz fan.
Yeah, and then, but it was so entertaining but so brief, Liz Truss.
At number 2.
Yeah.
So what was it about David Cameron that you like best?
Well, I
Was it
Brexit.
austerity?
Brexit.
I didn't
Was it
like
the deal with
well,
the Lib Dems?
There's a lot of things I don't like about every Tory leader, but he was bombastic public school boy shouting, and then as soon as he's out of the chamber, he's a totally different person. It was a public school debating society for him, and it
Would
was
you like
sort
to have a drink with him?
No,
Cup
I
of
don't
tea?
drink with anybody.
Cup of tea?
I don't drink.
I said a cup of tea.
No, I didn't have any private
Do you not drink
discussions with
tea?
them at all, other than meetings.
Are you friends with any of them?
No.
If I was on
David-
David,
All of them?
friends.
David Cameron is always polite to me when he sees me. I haven't seen Liz Truss for a while. I don't think you have either.
No.
Okay.
Boris, I used to occasionally see cycling around Islington without a helmet and his coat
I
undone.
hope you told him off.
But, you know,
We've run out of time. Bye.
Welcome back. Before I go to my Davey interview, you're just going to update us a bit on Ukraine.
Yeah, obviously, lots of focus on Donald Trump's conversation with Vladimir Putin. And I just want to show you this from James Heapy, who is the former defence minister. Make no mistake, this is a pivotal day in this century, pulling the plug on Ukraine, US disinvesting in European security, and the big powers redrawing the boundaries of smaller ones. A new reality faces Europe, and it's going to require urgent investment in defence and security.
So it's been an absolutely extraordinary day today. You probably heard the Secretary of Defence, Pete Hegseth, earlier on in the day saying that it should be French and British troops in Ukraine, defending Ukraine semi-permanently if some kind of peace deal is reached. We had that extraordinary statement from President Trump after a 90-minute conversation with Putin, in which he broadly praises Putin. So, I mean, this is not, I think, straightforwardly a party political issue. If you were British Prime Minister and you are watching what looks like a transfer of significant amounts of land to Putin after an illegal war, what should the Prime Minister do?
So I think, well, first of all, we've always backed Ukraine, and it has been a cross-party support. I think the positive thing is all sides want to bring an end to this war. So the timing of that common incentive is there. The talks have started, but they are by no means going to finish. And Zelensky needs to be absolutely at the centre of all of those talks. I think that...
And if he's not?
Well,
because at the moment, all the signs are from Ukraine that they feel completely cut out.
Well, I haven't heard any statements from Zelensky specifically. I said, you know, he said he had an hour's or a couple of hours call with him. But I think it's very important that we continue to support Ukraine and that you cannot have this deal done without Ukraine and actually without the rest of Europe as well. It's the start of a discussion. Now, the thing that really we all have to learn about Trump is what he says and what he does are not the same thing. And the way he does his negotiations and the style of how he does them is part of his art of the deal. And this is the start of a negotiation, but by no way should those negotiations take place without Ukraine. They decide what happens to Ukraine.
I've got to bring
and the
Jeremy
people
in,
of
actually,
Ukraine.
Gillian. We haven't got long. Jeremy, so what do you think about both what Trump is saying and what he may be trying to achieve in talking to Putin? What's your view?
First of all, if it saves Ukrainian lives, if it saves Russian lives, that's got to be some kind of step forward. The death toll amongst conscripted soldiers on both sides is massive. The loss of civilian life, mainly in Ukraine, but some in Russia, is appalling. Secondly, we don't really know what was said between Trump and Putin. We don't really know if there is a deal, is there an offer on? And surely what it has to be is recognising the failure of the world's institutions to do anything earlier. The UN, EU, etc. Well done those African leaders and Latin American leaders that tried to negotiate something a while back. So let's hope that there's going to be a serious negotiation. But above all, instead of global leaders in different parts of the world deciding which land should belong to who, this looks awfully like 1945 otherwise. Why not say, well, the people on the ground should actually have some say in where they live and and how they live in the future?
I mean, it is striking to me that somebody like Carl Bildt, for example, former NATO Secretary General, is saying very publicly, this feels to him, not like 1945, but 1939 and Munich.
Well, you can't have other countries saying these. First of all, you can't have countries invading other countries. And as Jeremy said, the loss of life has been catastrophic on all sides. And then say somebody else come along and say this is how it's all going to be divvied up. That's not how it works. It's certainly not going to be how it works. But I think it's the start of a discussion. And I think what would be interesting is when we have this conversation's had in a few weeks' time to see actually how that has developed.
As you say, huge uncertainties, but also huge anxieties around all of this. Now, a little earlier, I was joined here by the Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Ed Davey. We're back on Trump, believe it or not. He told MPs today that we should impose retaliatory tariffs against the US, given Trump's announcement, particularly of those steel tariffs you'll be aware of. So I asked him why he thought the UK should retaliate in that way.
Well, I actually said three things at PMQs. I said, first of all, we should be reminding President Trump who are the real friends of America over many, many years, because he seems to have forgotten that we, the allies in the war, have been friends of America ever since. But I was also saying we should prepare a plan for retaliatory tariffs, given what he's doing, the impact it's having on our close colleagues in our Commonwealth and Europe and on our own companies here in the UK. And as a starting idea for such a plan, I suggested tariffs on American electric vehicles, obviously Tesla. Obviously, the owner of Tesla is Elon Musk, that's no secret, and he's camping out in the Oval Office. And I think Trump and Musk need to hear that the UK is going to stand up to them.
My jaw dropped when I read President Trump's statement this afternoon about his conversation with Putin, praising Putin, not just the history of Russia as an ally of America, you know, in the war, but also just saying how great it was that he was taking the call. Trump's about to sell out Ukraine, isn't he?
I'm really sad I share your huge concern and surprise at this. First of all, I don't think the future of Ukraine and European security should be decided in a closed room by Putin and Trump. The UK should have a voice. Zelensky should have a voice. Our European allies should have a voice. And can we stop it? Well, that's the reason I asked the question to the Prime Minister.
Keir Starmer is going through all sorts of contortions so as not to make a choice between the EU and America. You think the time is now for him to show that he is closer to our European allies?
The reason I made a speech even before the inauguration, calling on a UK-EU customs union, is A, that shows our European colleagues we want to work with them. It is a plan B against all these threats of tariffs. And I also think it would help us negotiate with Trump. And you may not have read it, but The Art of the Deal, President Trump's bestseller, talks about how you do deals. And he basically says that if you see weakness in the other guy, if you smell desperation, then he walks all over you.
So you're saying that Keir Starmer looks desperate and weak when it comes to Trump?
Well, I think the Conservative Party, in their position, they look weak. I think Reform would lick the boots of
but
President Trump.
But is Keir Starmer showing enough backbone in relation to Donald Trump?
And I think, rather too like other opposition parties, the Prime Minister's, the government, is not being strong enough.
You know, many would say joining the customs union, particularly when it comes to the interests of British business, is an unsatisfactory halfway house. Why aren't you calling for membership of the single market?
Well, we set out our plan like we did last time with the ultimate goal of getting back in the single market. But we acknowledged, and I still acknowledge in your programme, and that's actually quite difficult. It's actually more difficult, I think, than getting back into the customs union. But
why? Because you are frightened of the Farage campaign on immigration?
No, not at all. I just think we've got to rebuild trust. And I speak to European colleagues, and they say that the trust in the United Kingdom is at an all-time low. And that's really, really sad. But I'm afraid the Conservatives undermined our relationship so badly. It will take time to recover. And, you know, I'm afraid those friends of mine who also believe in Europe, who would like us to go further and faster, I think they've got to read the room in Europe. And what we're trying to do in rebuilding that relationship, which I think we could do on multiple ways in our plan that we put at the general election, could be fast-tracked by this UK-EU customs union, a new trade deal with the EU. The trade deal that the Conservatives agreed is hugely damaging. A new trade deal along the lines we're talking about would be fantastic.
So don't go away, because there's much more from Gillian, Keegan, Jeremy Corbyn and Ed Davey in just a minute or two.
Hello, welcome to the break. Jeremy, we're talking about your beloved...
El Gato there.
That's your cat.
Yeah.
You lost...
He
Is it
died.
him or her? He, sorry.
He died a couple of weeks ago.
I'm so sorry.
Very suddenly, very unexpected. Took him to the vet, and he died of a heart attack whilst being tested.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Well, let's have some nice memories of him.
Yeah.
Just tell me about this. We understand that he went outside during a Peston on Sunday when David Cameron came on the telly.
Straight away.
Didn't like
Straight
him.
away. He was actually an extraordinarily political cat.
Was he?
Yes. But he actually took no prisoners, but he also carried a grudge. So if I went out in the morning and he didn't want me to go out, he'd sit there by the door the whole day.
Voting Tory.
I'd come back in the evening, and he'd wait his chance for me going upstairs, scratch on the back of the leg.
Look at this you said about him. We were concerned about his disappointing individualism and lack of concern for
We
others.
were very concerned about that, and I was there trying to indoctrinate him, actually.
I've got to be quick.
Indoctrinate with
Got to be quick. I
goodness.
haven't got any time. You thought he was a bit of a Tory.
Yeah, but
do you think cats are Tory?
Yeah.
Generally.
They're very individualistic, and
Whilst dogs are socialists.
All
I've not got that far.
creatures.
Very individualist. But, you see, I point out here that there was a stray cat, an emaciated, hungry stray cat.
El Gato
and
helped him.
he stepped back
I've run out of time.
and shared his dinner.
That is very sweet.
Brilliant.
Bye.
Welcome back. Now, I understand, Anushka, you've got a treat to share with us.
The government has launched a new review into adult social care by Baroness Casey, but we won't hear back until 2028, and we have been here before. In 2011, Andrew Dilnot recommended a raft of measures, including a means-tested cap on individual care costs of £50,000 in today's money, but it didn't go anywhere. The Tories then planned to cap costs at £86,000, with the Office for Budget Responsibility costing it at 0.25% of GDP. But it was too much in the eyes of Rachel Reeves, who scrapped it, saying it would save £1 billion in the next year. But we have a social care crisis. Now, funding has grown quite a lot in cash terms over the years. It was quite flat in real terms, but eventually 15.4% higher than in 2009-10. However, the population has been growing fast. And if we look at this in per person terms, in purple, you can see we are barely above the line. And if we adjust it by age, because the number of older people is growing even faster, the Health Foundation says funding has actually fallen by 5%. So what does it all mean? Well, the left of this beautiful chart represents over 2 million people who have asked their local government for funded care. Of them, 28% receive no care at all. 29% are simply directed to a low-level service that doesn't require an assessment. Only these people at the top get what they ask for.
Thanks, Anushka. So in case any of you think I'm taking leave of my senses, there's nothing that Davey and me enjoy more than a bit of statistical analysis of the crisis in social care. Now, in the second part of my chat with Sir Ed Davey, I began by asking him if he was positioning himself as the left-leaning conscience of the Labour Party, and, to get back to our social care conversation, whether he had any confidence that the Labour government would fulfil his greatest ambition, which is namely to see proper resourcing for social care.
Well, first of all, I don't agree with your analysis that we're to the left. I think being in favour of free trade and working with our European partners on the economy, on security and defence, that's a tradition that often one nation Tories used to take up. So I don't agree with your categorisation. You mentioned social care. I'm pleased that the government actually does want to look at it, but their 3-year timetable is ridiculous. I spoke to Andrew Dilnot, who was the last person to do a major review back in 2012. He's really clear from all his experience, and given that we've got previous commissions and reports, that this could be done far more quickly. And I believe it could be done within this year. So reforms could take place, the money could flow, and actually, crucially, it would start helping the NHS.
Now, sadly, we are almost out of time. I've got 2 questions. We are about to see from the government reform of the bit of the welfare system that provides payments to disabled people. And there is now a consensus between Labour and the Tories that we are spending far too much on disability and incapacity benefit. Do the Lib Dems agree with that?
We do want to help people into work. Many disabled people want to be in work, and there are too many barriers in their way.
But carrot or stick?
Well, I actually think you need to look at each individual person as an individual, because they're all different. Anyone who knows anything about disability knows you have to tailor the package of support to that person. And we've not seen that in the past. If we saw that, I think you'd have disabled people cheering and saying, yeah, I can do some work, I want to contribute. Now, of course, there are some disabled people who won't be able to. Sadly, as you may know, I have a disabled son, and regrettably, I don't think he'll ever be able to work in his life. We work very hard to try to give him his independence, make him as much as independent as possible, but I don't think that will get him into work ever. And there are people like my son who
No,
will
of
never
course,
work.
and it's a terrible tragedy, and obviously people have to be properly supported.
But there are others who can work and want to work, but often face barriers to do that. So what I'm saying is, I think we need a more nuanced position. And what I really, really dislike is the idea of lumping people all together, because that's not the truth, that's not how people are, and Liberal Democrats will oppose that.
Ed Davey, as always, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
They're being tested on hard.
So that was Ed Davey, and on an action-packed show, you're going to pack in some more action on an ITV scoop, aren't you?
Yeah, an ITV News scoop by our colleague Rohit Kachru. He basically had lots of undercover filming of an extremist group that said it was preparing for a race war. It was called Active Club England, and it was basically posing as a fitness group. Now, we had loads of this undercover filming on this. And Gillian, I just want to ask you about this. A group like Active Club England are basically very difficult to ban in this country because we have a very high threshold. You have to be guilty of propagating terrorism, not just hateful extremism. Your commissioner on extremism, Dame Sarah Khan, advised your government in 2021 to change that rule so that we could stop groups like this. Why was it never acted on?
I don't know. It wasn't my part of the remit. I wasn't responsible for that. But
Do you think these sorts of groups should be banned? It's a really upsetting
I don't know.
film.
I've never heard of this group until now, so I would have to see it. And then this is really where it comes in terms of hate crime and whether it crosses that threshold. That was what that was there for. I don't know what this group have done. But clearly, if they're doing things that are crossing that threshold, and there is the hate crime threshold,
but this is
then
the
they
question: should the threshold change, Jeremy? Because Labour aren't changing it. But what it means is that people can propagate hateful extremism to young people. That was your brief, wasn't it? You know, you were looking over schools.
Well, we had the Online Harms Act for that.
Jeremy, nothing can be done to ban them.
Yes, there should be things done to prevent that, but also we need to be looking at far-right extremism in our society.
This is far-right extremism.
That's what I'm saying. That's exactly why I'm saying it. We should be looking much more at that, looking much more at dealing with that, much more at challenging that, and much more at challenging
Because you
the sort of
traditionally, Jeremy,
racist
have
atmosphere
been very
that
much
they
an
generate.
advocate of free speech. So how do you draw the line? At what point do you regard the behaviour of a group like this? And I have to say, the things as on camp, there's awful anti-Semitism, there is awful, racism, racist views expressed about the black community.
We saw that in a WhatsApp group from a Labour MP.
Well, look, there is a right of free speech, of course, but there is not a right to abuse others. There's not a right to promote racist attitudes, be it Islamophobia.
Well, there is a right to abuse others.
Well, I'm saying a right to racist abuse of others, be it Islamophobia, anti-Semitism or whatever. Or maybe it should be illegal.
That's
maybe
what I'm asking
maybe
you.
it should be looked at.
Should we be changing the line?
We have spent far too much time thinking about prevent strategy when we should have been looking, I believe, at the rise of the far right within our society.
I mean, certainly, one of the things they talk about in this film is, in the case of some of them, they do talk about weaponry, don't they?
Yeah, they talk. I mean,
doing what with weaponry? You're talking about this. We haven't seen anything about them.
Well,
never heard of them.
Major investigation today from ITV News.
They are a new group that managed to attract members really fast. And we had this brilliant undercover operation. And I have to say, you haven't seen it. Would anybody that's at home, it's worth watching this thing online because we are seeing the rise of extremism. It is a deeply troubling time in that sense. And
Well,
I think Anushka's point is absolutely right.
Robert, it's the rise of the far right across Europe as well as here that has to be challenged. It has to be challenged politically as well as legally.
And some would say there's extremism in the other direction as well. But that's it. Now, along with MPs, we're having a short break next week. They may not have earned it, but we certainly have. Who knows what Trump will have done by the time we're back in 2 weeks. Eek, as they say. Goodbye.